I'm Bryan, and welcome to Vinyl Paints. This is part 2 in a 3-part series dedicated to this painting that I call the Big One. At the time, it was my most ambitious project I had ever done. For those of you who missed part 1, the Big One was a painting that I did for my niece for her first birthday. I wanted to paint her something original, something neat, and I wanted to include all the characters from her parents' childhood. It's important to note that at the time that I started this, I'd only been cel painting for about 2, maybe 3 months, so I was probably a little bit over my head. I was definitely in way over my head here, so I was very much an amateur, and I probably was a little bit over ambitious with what I was trying to do here. I probably should have approached this today, not when I first started, but that's the great thing about taking on art projects. Sometimes you surprise yourself and you get a lot better by diving in head first. The way I like to approach cel painting is kind of more of the classical approach. There are different ways, but one of the most classical approaches is to kind of think of it as layers or colors. You kind of do one color and then you kind of do the next color, like you're doing multiple layers. And usually you try to start with the details and then you try to go into the bigger colors, so that way you can just kind of paint on top of the details. And you'll see that right here on Optimus Prime, where I kind of just paint over the blue of his eyes. The paint on, unlike other paint mediums like watercolor or gouache or oil, you're not really ever mixing the paint on cel painting. They're more of they're supposed to be a solid, consistent color. So you kind of want to do one color and then do one on top. So when you do paint over top of something, you aren't going to get any of that mixing of colors. This is something I do which may kind of break the mold of traditional approaches to cel painting, is I very rarely wait for the one painting color to dry, but that's just more because of time constraints. I usually have like a 2 or 3 hour window per night to paint, and if I want to get something done, I kind of got to risk it a little bit and not wait till it's fully dried before I start the next color. Most of the characters I did were two-tone, meaning they have like a light and dark version of the same color. The Iroh was a little bit different. His arm is very bright red, and that's because I knew there was going to be some fiber optic lights that kind of went through there, and I really wanted them to stand out a little bit different. I wanted a huge contrast there, so that's why I had to use 3 tones on it. My sister-in-law didn't really have a lot of cartoons that she remembered from her childhood, with the exception of Chibi Maruko-chan. So I wanted to include quite a few of the characters. I included 3 of the characters from the show in this painting. And I was quite surprised because it is very popular and has such a strong following, and I had never heard of it before, so it was quite an awesome thing to discover. Uncle Iroh's beard was a great example of like me just kind of experimenting with the shadows a little bit, but it was also an important moment because it really gave me the confidence to think that I was actually onto something here, and I was actually really happy with it. Unlike a lot of like dugas that you get where the shadows have already been defined and you're kind of just filling it in, I hadn't learned how to transfer the colored line work from a duga onto a cel yet, so I'm kind of just making the shadows up as I go along here and kind of like imagining it as I go. There's a lot of room for error there, and it was the first time that I kind of started to feel like the color choices I'd made and the shading was going to work out. Going with this whole theme of yellows, of layers, you can see here that I did the blues, then I did reds, then I did yellows. I did do skin colors in here as well. Uncle Iroh was a little bit different than the other characters. He is from a more modern series, and there's a bit of a different aspect, visual aspect to it. So I put a little extra detail and actually did the dark shadows under the lips and under the eyes just to give it a little bit more contrast so it would better match the Last Airbender's animated series, which wasn't actually animated by hand. It was actually all done on computers, but it gave it a bit of a different feel. We're going to be coming up to this great example on why you should always have a reference. One of the characters I did was a little prince and his pet fox. Unfortunately, I drew it on I don't remember where I drew it, but I didn't have a reference with me when I drew it. And if you'll notice the face of the fox, it's more of a husky face where the face of a husky is white and then it's got the back part of the head is the darker color. I just kind of painted it as if it was a fox where the top is red orange and the bottom is more of white. And I hope nobody noticed, but it's kind of one of those fun little things that I know that no one will probably notice, but yeah, always have a reference. Welcome to the second layer. One of the things that made this cell slightly more difficult than my typical painting is that this was the first time I'd done a multi-cell setup. So that means that there's actually 2 cell sheets that are used to create the painting, as well as a backdrop. And right from the get-go, I kind of ran into some problems here. This was the first time I was using that reddish brown paint, which has become kind of famous for not working, but this was the first time I ever used it, and I thought it was complete user error. I kind of just rubbed it off, started again, and continued along my way. One of the difficulties of a multi-cell setup is that you really need your cell paint to go on smoothly and flat. In the beginning, my paint was a little bit thick, and this ended up being a problem when I did the multi-cell setup because it wouldn't lie flat on the canvas, and in fact I had to actually build up the paint a little bit and kind of sand down some of the parts in order to get it to fit snug and flat. One of the things that I don't know if it's just me, but certain characters I just get on like a first attempt. I don't know why they come to me naturally. They come simpler, and then there's other times that I struggle with certain characters. This Winnie the Pooh I drew maybe in about 10 minutes with the piglet, and I really like the design of it. It's kind of a cross between the Disney Pooh and the teddy bear Pooh that is kind of like the classic ones that you see in older books. And for some reason it just came very easy for me. I struggled with the Eeyore. Eeyore I must have spent an hour on and I was never very satisfied with, which is why on the other cell he's more of a Disney-esque type of Eeyore. I just could not get a original creation that I was satisfied with. Often forgotten in this whole kind of Disney dominated world is the amazing work of Chuck Jones and the other artists at Warner Brothers. Without a doubt, there's something amazing to Bugs Bunny and the other characters where they're actually surprisingly difficult to do right, at least for me. They seem very simple, but just even the slightest thing off and they look weird and confusing. And to go back with what I was talking about earlier with some characters are easy, some are not, I don't know why I struggle so much with Looney Tunes or Merry Melodies, but I found it very difficult. This is something I started to do, and it's kind of I guess a reminiscence of like a late 90s, early 2000s comic book cross-hatching thing. I don't know what made me start doing it. I think I started in my cyberpunk one. I kind of liked it because I thought it was like a nice diffusion of shadow into lighter tones, but I also thought it added a little bit of depth to the color. And in animation, when you don't really have that a gradient that you get in like I guess digital animation or digitally colored things, I just thought it added something a little bit different. So I use it quite often. I use it here upcoming on the tree as well, and I just really liked the way it looked, and I thought it really complemented the piece. The one thing that is always a struggle with paint is that you're always kind of managing resources when you're doing vinyl paints. There aren't a lot of colors, so sometimes when you mix a color, you mix a batch and you kind of hope that you have enough. It's almost impossible to get the same color twice. I've tried measuring it with a dropper and still sometimes it doesn't actually come with the exact same. If you haven't already, you should look at my video where I kind of talk about some of the cell paints that are available. So if you're ever interested, you know kind of what the differences are and what the advantages and disadvantages are. And I was definitely holding my breath here because I thought I had mixed enough paint, but I know there was a couple points there where I was getting really nervous. In case you're wondering why only half of Kiki exists on this, going back to what I said earlier, the goal of this is that there's going to be fiber optics in there coming out of that book. And because of that, anything that I didn't want to interact with light or not interact as much with, I was going to put it on the second cell, or this cell that you're seeing me paint right now. And it is a little bit tricky because certain characters aren't really in the foreground. Like, technically speaking, the cat is in the background, but I painted on the second cell because I didn't want it to have any light on there. I tried to pick it out and to separate into what I wanted the light to interact with and what I didn't want the light to interact with. And so everything that I didn't want the light to touch ended up on the second cell. Earlier I talked about layers, and I was talking about how Optimus, I usually do one color and then move on to the next color. Sometimes that doesn't work out for various reasons, lack of color choice. And then there's the Optimus Prime here. Optimus, I would have probably done him when I did the rest of the red, but I decided to wait because I wasn't sure how much of it was actually going to be seen. I knew he was going to be hiding behind a tree, so I was very hesitant at first to put anything down until I knew. Now, the problem with that was I didn't really design his chassis, I guess the windows and stuff, so I had to kind of quickly go in and draw it. It kind of turned out pretty good. I was actually pretty happy with it. And what you're seeing briefly right now is you're seeing my first ever use of a dip pen, and that was with the rose from the Little Prince. And then I immediately went over to the tree and immediately regretted it because I kind of screwed up there. Luckily, it's a black on brown, so it kind of looked like shading, but I definitely needed to get a lot better with it. One of the things that's fun about this painting, where I mix different characters, is I try to stay somewhat true to the character designs where I could, but characters like Optimus Prime and Winnie the Pooh and other ones, I kind of took a little bit of liberty and kind of put my own little spin on it. And because I was messing around with the windows, it was actually, I got to do something a little bit different and a little bit fun. So as you saw earlier, the Little Prince, the rose, I actually drew on a separate piece of paper and put it in after. The paper that it was on was actually an envelope, and that's actually very common. That is pretty much my process, where I'll draw something while I'm on the phone or whatever, when I'm at work, and then I'll bring it back and then put it onto the actual large sheet. I don't know what inspired me to put this late edition of Eevee in there. I guess I just figured I wanted something that would still be relevant down the road, and I feel like Pokemon's a pretty safe bet and everyone needs a starter Pokemon. And it was just like I said, a quick afterthought. I pretty much had been done the painting by this point, but I just thought I could kind of squeeze in one more just for fun. This project took a long time to finish. I believe I started in June or July and I delivered it around December. So there's a lot of things that have been changing, and you can kind of start to notice that. The paint's becoming a little bit smoother, not as thick as it was before. As well, you're probably going to notice that I switched over from using the original tracing paper on the bottom to rest my hand to now I'm wearing long sleeve sports shirts. And the reason why I do that is that cell sheets are just incredibly easy to get dirty. One of the things I found was that using a sports shirt, because I like to rest my hand on the bottom of the page, I found that it actually helped keep it cleaner. It allowed me to move it around a little bit smoother, and it wasn't as clumsy as actually having tracing paper, which sometimes I would, when I twisted the painting, would catch some of the paint and cause it to spread and ruin actually some work. This is a part that I don't usually include in most of my videos because it's not terribly interesting, and it actually goes on for quite a while. I'm usually doing this mostly every other day once I've done a section. But this is just cleaning the cell. I use alcohol, sometimes water, erasing all the smudge marks, fingerprints. You'd be surprised what gets on there. But I also call it the cleanup phase, which is kind of, I'm taking that term from animation where they usually clean up the line art. But I am doing that as well here, where I'll use a toothpick and I'll start picking away at paint that may have like splattered or more realistically gone past the lines, I know coloring within the line seems like an easy thing, but it's a little bit harder when you're dealing with a very flowing paint. And this is where we kind of leave it off here. I kind of like to show that transition from the paper sketch of what it looks like to the painting, and I'm getting this ready for the next video, which will be start to put in the fiber optic cables to finish this piece off. And I look forward to wrapping this up in part 3. Thanks for watching. I'm Bryan, and this was Vinyl Paints.